All right, guys. Welcome to our second edition of the employee panel, where we'll be discussing diversity topics. We have four employees here today with us, and super excited about this talk. We have Miss Sarah Fullwood, we have Miss Erin Wynn, Mr. Tyler Dawson, and Mr. John Nelson. Thank you all for just being here today. Like I said, we're going to be just jumping right into it. We're going to be discussing some of the diversity topics today. A lot of things that's going on in our world, a lot of things that we can talk about. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let's jump right in. All right. So the first question that I'll just pose to the group is, what does it mean to you? What's your definition of a racist?
I'll kick that off.
Sure.
That's an interesting one to me because I tend to look at racism, not a racist. I don't like labeling the person. So, I mean, for a definition, a racist is somebody who does racist actions, makes racist choices. I think behind that's very much a continuum and a sliding scale, and I think virtually everybody at some point, intentional or not, takes part in some actions that are racist. You know, again, by intent or not, they might not have meant it, but I think all of us carry those tendencies.
Tyler, I really like that. I've been thinking about this because I think, at least growing up, I would have probably, I grew up in a very white, very conservative bubble. And I probably would have just defined racist as a member of the KKK or somebody that like actively and daily like perpetuated violence and like very visible hate against other races. Now I'm much more aligned, I think, with what you said, and it's not like a static identity, but it more so is a way of acting or thinking, and sometimes it's so insidious because it is insidious in our society that like I can be racist and I can be complicit with racist systems, ideas, practices, even though I would not, hopefully, right? I would spend most of my day not doing that. So I think it's more fluid, and like we make the choice every day and every minute of every day whether we're going to be racist, which, you know, is perpetuating the idea that one race is superior to others or certain races are inferior, or we make the choice to be anti-racist, which is the opposite of that. But there is no neutrality, you know?
I think for me, it's kind of a mindset of whether or not you have an us versus them mentality, whatever that means. You know, like if you think of yourself as a collective group based on a race and you think of other people inherently as a collective group based on a race, you're already entering into any interaction with a person who's of a different race than you with an us-them mentality. And so I think that's kind of, at least in my opinion, sort of where the racism starts, is sort of if there's an initial divide in your brain as to, you know, being in a particular category, I think there's a potential propensity to start making assumptions about people based on what category you put them in, judging by the color of their skin. And so I think that that's kind of the thing, you know, every person has a right to be an individual. And so I think if you treat people as individuals rather than as a collective, I think that's how you sort of, you know, avoid racism, you know, because you're not lumping people into categories. So to me, like the definition of a racist person would be somebody who always makes judgments and assumptions about somebody based on the color of their skin. Whether those are positive or negative is not really irrelevant, but I mean, you can be racist and, you know, if you think like that, it's a mindset that permeates everything. And I think that people, at least the people that I have known that I would sort of think of as being more racist, I don't think that they begin it necessarily assuming that it's a discriminatory thing. I think that they just start making those assumptions about people in categories, and then it sort of just gets to become a bigger and bigger thing, and then, you know, negative things slip in as well, and you just get this just a weird dynamic that happens, and then it becomes a habit, and then that's just kind of the way that they end up living their lives, which is unfortunate, but
yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I think piggybacking on that, and then what Aaron said, if we are to have the conversations that need to be had about race, we need to get real about this, that there is the idea out there that you're only a racist if you are a member of the KKK, or only a racist if you do these overtly bad things, where it is much more subtle than that and systemic than that, that it doesn't have to be one bad person doing bad things. It can be a system of things that negatively impact a person or a group of people. For me, I tend to think of it kind of like a step stool or a ladder, that any belief really that puts you one step above another person or puts somebody below you, if you have that mentality that this group of people is below you for whatever reason, that's a racist idea. That is being a racist. And it doesn't have to take on overt actions where you're actively discriminating against them. But if that's your mindset, that you are superior to another person and their race, that's racist.
Man, those are some great answers. A lot of things that you guys point out is very, very true, and it is a great ideas. I love the point of view of what you said, Sarah, just about focusing on the individual versus the group. I thought that was a very good point there, and with the whole system thing versus, just not necessarily just a racist act, but a system that puts another race or put them in a bad position to be put in a bad position. So very interesting points. Thank you guys so much for that one.
Hey, Meg, can I
yes.
connect something that Sarah
Yes.
said with what? So I just thought of this example that I think goes along really nicely with the idea of viewing people as individuals or groups. As white people, we always get the benefit of the doubt as being viewed as an individual. So like if we think about mass shootings, right, the Dylan Roof in Charleston, right, he murdered like almost a dozen Black people who were at church. He was treated by the police, by the media as like this one white guy who's clearly like very troubled and did a terrible thing, but it's just him. Like we as a society don't then ascribe that same sort of tendency to all white men, right? But with like a terrorist attack or, when it's an act of violence perpetuated by a person of color, instead of saying, wow, that one person did an awful thing, we tend to ascribe everybody in this group probably would do the same thing, or everybody in this group has the same tendencies. And I think that's a really interesting kind of connection between the insidious nature and also how we've just kind of been conditioned to group people like that.
Well, if I can tack onto that, to your example, even the language we use, when you say a terrorist act, we all receive that as like, oh, that's a message about probably radical Islamic terrorism.
Yep.
We ascribe that to a people, to a religion, in a certain part of the country, people who originate from there. When even that word, if you go and define terrorism, a lot more things fit that category than what we call terrorism, but those are the ones we call terrorists.
Right.
Man, those are very good points. You hit the nail on the head there, because so many times that, if, like you said, if it's a white kid, it's more so he's troubled, he had a rough childhood, it's an isolated event, and not all people will look that way. But when it's a person of color, a Black person, it's more so the entire race is like, everybody's like that. That's the way we see all Black people or all people of color. So that was a very, very interesting one. And Tyler, you hit the nail on the head with the terrorist act. Whenever you think about that, it's just you automatically go to a certain group of people because we've been conditioned to think that way. But like you said, with the definition, a terrorist act could be so many different things. So excellent points. Anyone else? All right, man, we'll jump right in. So the next question is, what does it mean to be an anti-racist versus, on the flip side of that? What do you guys think? Sarah, you want to say something? It sounded like you was jumping in there.
I was thinking.
Okay.
Because I mean, that's kind of tricky, right? Because it's like, you could look at it in a couple different ways. I mean, you could look at an anti-racist as somebody who actively tries to correct or help people who seem like they have a problem with being racist, to try to like fix that issue. Or you could look at it as more of a personal thing of like, you're personally focused on preventing racism, like in your inner circle or in yourself or whatever the case may be. So I think it kind of depends on how you think about it in that sense. But I do think that it's sort of, so I was talking earlier about like the us versus them mentality, and I think that it's kind of delicate too, because it's like, I don't want to classify people as us versus them, but at the same time, if somebody has either a racial or an ethnic identity, like let's say that you're from a particular country and you identify with that and your race is wrapped up into it, or you're from the US and your race is important to you and you identify yourself like it's part of who you are as a person, like you self-identify with a racial group or something of that nature, it's like it's not my place to take that away from somebody. So it's like there's a delicate balance between respecting a racial identity and pushing a racial identity on somebody else. So to me, that's kind of where it becomes sort of like a delicate balance of accepting somebody's identity versus ascribing an identity to them. And to me, like there's some, like the anti-racial thing, like there's some element of being aware of that delicate balance for somebody. I mean, you could make the same argument with gender, I guess, if it's like, it's a little easier to tell what gender somebody is or whatever. But I mean, to say like, oh, because you're this gender, you have to do these things. It's sort of like it's the same issue to me of like, again, not creating somebody else's identity for them, but letting them tell you what their identity is, I guess. So anyway, I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry.
Well, and to go along with that, we've heard like, I'm colorblind, I don't see race, and I don't think that's what anti-racism is talking about, is because really that's doing a disservice to it, because you have to recognize those differences and understand what those differences mean in that person's life and how that colors their experiences, and those experiences are different than your own experiences. And so, yeah, for me, an anti-racist is one who has that understanding that there are differences, and those differences have implications, very real implications, in how the person navigates through their life, and acknowledges the differences and doesn't put people down a rung on that ladder, that stands up for humanity, acknowledges that even though there are differences, we are both human and therefore have an inherent worth, and that worth is the same as a human being. I know I've had those experiences in life where somebody says something or somebody does something and you're just like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, or I definitely don't agree with that, but do you actually stand up for the other person's rights? Whether that's the offensive uncle at Thanksgiving or a coworker who says something just offhanded. It's much easier for us to just, say, oh, I don't agree with that, but I'll let it slide because I don't want to get involved in that discussion. I think the anti-racist knows that in their core, that, hey, we all have value, we all have worth, and I'm going to stand up for everybody's worth.
Yeah, to me, I see there are two parts to it. One's what you just described, John, about, somebody shows racism, what do you do? How do you address that? And that, I think, is really hard, because having those conversations is tricky. I mean, anytime you're dealing with somebody's, long-held beliefs, they probably don't realize that they're doing that, or they don't think there's anything wrong with that, and you have to somehow reach them in that and try to help them understand, like, no, that's really actually harmful to a lot of people. The other piece of it, I think, is looking at the systems, which I think a lot of our society is starting to understand more and more. But, you can encounter a racist individual, well, you can also encounter racist systems, whether it's capital systems or government systems or whatever, any kind of system like that. I think, one of the big ones I see is, housing systems that are carryover from about 50 plus years ago, that we're still seeing the generational effects of blatantly racist housing policies from the 60s and around that era. And seeing now, like, what are the effects of those? How do we overcome what's held over from that time? What are the effects and how do we address that? There are a lot of discussions going on now about policing systems and do those have racist outcomes, like anti-Black or anti-minority outcomes based on the system that's there, that most people might see this as a perfectly good and fair system. But I think an anti-racist mindset looks for, where are the unintended effects of that, or where's the intended effects, but where are those effects, and then what can I do to step in and make a difference there?
Yeah, I think that what you brought up, Tyler, is so important, is that it is like a personal and a policy level. And I think, like, one of the reasons maybe that these conversations can be so challenging when you encounter racist action or thought in somebody that you love is that we have been kind of conditioned that to be called a racist or to be labeled a racist is the worst possible thing that can happen to you. It equates you with the members of the KKK. It is, when really, like, I'm trying to get to a place where I invite that kind of conversation, because I know 100% as a white person living in the United States of America, I say and do and think racist thoughts. I just do, because that's how our country's set up. And so I want to be called out, right? Like when those things come up, because it doesn't mean that I'm done or I'm canceled or I'm a terrible person, but it means it's an opportunity to grow and to advance anti-racist thinking. I'm not 100% there. I still think my gut would drop if somebody came up to me and said, like, hey, Erin, when you said XYZ, that was racist and here's why. Like, that would be really hard for me to hear. But I think as anti-racist people, we have to be willing to have those conversations and receive those conversations, because that's the only way that, I think that personal work coupled with, like what Tyler was saying, understanding the effects and all too often the intent of some policies, like that's the work, and you can't have one without the other. And I think so often we focus on the personal aspect of racism and the interpersonal interactions, but the anti-racist also looks at systems and lobbies their representatives and demonstrates and marches and all those things.
I kind of think another thing too is kind of to John's point, and you said something about people claiming to be colorblind and that's not really possible or ideal, I suppose. And I think that I agree with that, because I think that it's a positive thing to appreciate differences in people, whether that's differences in thought, differences in culture, differences in lifestyle, whatever that may be. It's good to accept people for who they are and to appreciate differences. So I think that's more anti-racism to me, is to acknowledge and accept differences rather than to categorize them as negative, because it's not, whether it's a cultural practice or something that's not the way that you do things, and to accept that and appreciate it as part of the colorful world that we live in culturally, instead of saying that, oh well, there's only one right way to do things and that's my way and nobody else can, nobody else's viewpoint matters. So I think that that to me is a big part of it, is an appreciation rather than a what's the word I'm looking for? I guess an appreciation rather than a discrimination against a difference. That's anti-racism to me.
I love what you just said there. Yeah, we don't want to sterilize and whitewash everything and codify and say this is what thou shalt do type of thing. And if you don't see those differences, you're discounting a big chunk of what makes that person up and what goes into their whole worldview. If I just say, hey, race doesn't exist, I'm colorblind, that discounts the entire experience of being a person of color, which goes into who they are and how they process information and how they see the world and how, more importantly, how the world treats them. And that just discounts all of that. That was huge, yeah.
Oh no, that was definitely huge, man. I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm just getting excited. But what makes life so beautiful is that we're all made up, we're all different, and we come with different experiences, different colors, different backgrounds. But that's the thing that makes us unique together. So I think that when we recognize that we all are different and you accept those things and accept someone for who they are and try to get to know that person for themselves, I think that makes everything more beautiful, because those are the things. I think me and John, we talk about this all the time. I think we have more in common than we have differences. You know what I mean? So even though we are different colors, different experiences, different come from different places, we all are linked a certain way, whether it's humanity, whether it's experiences, we all are linked. So that's the thing that makes it so beautiful. So thank you guys. That was excellent. All right. So the next question is more of a two-part question. And it says that what is white privilege and what don't people understand about it? So this is a hot topic today. When you say white privilege, this kind of push a lot of buttons. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this one.
I kind of want to jump on that one. Sorry, I saw Aaron, you're muted already. But
okay. You go, Tyler, and I'll take you back off you.
All right. So I actually just had a conversation about this and brought back a definition of white privilege that I absolutely believe is true. Is that if you go into a situation and don't see the role of race in that situation, then that shows that you're privileged. That you don't have to think about what is this? How am I going to be treated in this place because of how I look, because I'm white? How am I going to be treated when applying for a loan, buying for a car, showing up in a church, going to a job interview? If you don't have to think about how race is involved in that situation, then you have some level of white privilege. That is a privilege to not have to even consider that. And I think that one of the probably the biggest misconception about white privilege is that if you have white privilege, that you didn't have to work for what you have. And that's never true. That seems like that's always the rebuttal to that is, well, I worked hard for what I have. Yes, you did. And it calls to mind these images of, running a race when somebody has to carry a sandbag on their shoulder and the other person doesn't, or looking over a fence at a ball game when somebody gets a stool to stand on and you don't. And it's these things, you're not working any less, but you might have more to overcome. Or if you have white privilege, some degree of white privilege or any kind of privilege, you probably have less to overcome. So it's not that you didn't work for what you have. I'm sure everybody absolutely did. But like in my case, I didn't consider this until years after I got out of college, but my college was paid for by family. And that's not true for a lot of people. And I've had to come to realize how big an element of privilege that is, that I didn't have to carry student loans. I didn't have to work my butt off all during college to get through and pay for stuff. I still worked. I still did all the classes. I still worked for, my eating out money and all that stuff. But, there are a lot of people who worked a lot harder than me because they didn't have the privilege of having that college paid for. Okay, your turn, Aaron.
I just echo everything you said. I think one of the ways that it was helpful for me to start thinking about it was, there have been difficult circumstances in my life. There have been difficult circumstances, in most people's lives, but they weren't difficult because of my race, right? And it's that intersection of things. And I, as a white woman especially, I can be pretty confident that anytime I go into a store, nobody's gonna follow me and suspect that I might steal something. Like if I go to the drugstore to buy a flesh-colored Band-Aid, it's gonna match my skin. Like if I were to get stopped by the police, that will 99% of the time go great for me. And it's not that I haven't struggled, but the system was built with me as the default, with me as the majority. And that's not my fault. And like, I don't need to feel like guilty for the, it's not my, how do I want to say this? It's not my fault that white privilege exists, but I benefit from it every single day. So it's my responsibility to recognize it and to work to dismantle it.
I like that. I like the idea of the default. It's the norm, and there are deviations from the norm. And because it is the norm, we get a benefit of the doubt. Tyler, like you said, when you go for a loan or something, there's already the implicit belief that everything is above boards and you're good to go, and it's just arranging the final little details. If I lock my keys out of my car and I'm walking around the car, like looking in the window, I get the benefit of the doubt from society that, oh, he must have locked his keys in the car. Where if a black man did the same thing, the implicit assumption is he's about to rob the car or break into the car. If one of my kids kicks a ball in the neighbor's yard and I just go around the side yard and let myself in through the gate, implied that what I'm doing is okay and I'm not questioned. Whereas Micah might not have that luxury or that privilege. And like Aaron said, that it doesn't mean that we haven't worked hard. Everyone struggles. Everyone has challenges. Everyone has things that they need to overcome. It's just that race hasn't been one of those things that you have had to overcome. Socioeconomic status, education, all these other things that go into it, sure. But race isn't one of them because we have that pass, the benefit of the doubt, so to speak.
What's so crazy about that, John, is for the record, I would definitely not do that. I would not go over and do it. But I think you said something, Aaron, like everything that I do, I view through my lens, I look through as race. So I'm always looking at it like, okay, how would this look, as a black man if I'm doing this certain activity? And everything that I do goes into that. And to be sure that, okay, for example, if I'm at work, if I have one of my white coworkers who's passionate about his job and he's upset about it, oh, he's just being passionate. You know what I mean? But me, if I do something like that, it's like, okay, we have Micah's been aggressive or the angry black man, so it's like, okay, so I have to find ways to make sure that the way to express myself, even when I'm upset, I have to go and take a minute and get myself together so it's not perceived as something different. But it's still the same passion that I have for my job as well. But there's certain things that I can't do or that I wouldn't do because I'll be viewed this way. So I've had it my entire life, but it's just something that comes with the package. But that's the way I view it as well, is through the lens of race. And I'm like, man, I can't do certain things, or I can't get upset in the grocery store, because they're taking long in the line, like, hurry up. I can't say that because now I'm like, oh, I'm being aggressive. I'm bullying people, or, I'm stereotyped as the angry black guy. So I have to be very mindful of that. It's just the lens that I look through, but it's very interesting though.
And what you said, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Sorry. Don't you think, though, that it's inherently unfair to put that on yourself? Because you are choosing to conform to a lens that is either actually put on you or is perceived as being put on you. So now you're changing your behavior. So you're potentially eliminating friction points, right, is what you're doing, because you're like, well, I don't want them to think I'm an angry black man, so I'm not going to behave this way. So you're curbing your behavior to fit the way that you think people want you to behave, which is not fair. Whereas if you behave the way that you want to behave and somebody says, hey, you're being an angry black man, that gives you an opportunity to address that and say, no, I have emotions. I'm a person. This is how I feel about this. So, I mean, I understand that there are certain situations that you don't want to put your safety at risk. If you feel that, you know, like to John's point about going into somebody's backyard, I wouldn't do that because we live in Texas and I don't want to get shot. But, you know, that's a personal thing. If you think that it's more of a risk for, you know, Micah, for you to do it than John thinks it is for him to do it, you know, that's a personal perceived risk issue. And I understand that if John feels more comfortable and Micah doesn't, whatever, like that is what it is. But in terms of just like regular interpersonal interactions, if it's like you feel like you have to control yourself more because of your race, if you're accepting that and you're putting that on yourself, you're allowing that system to shape you as a person, and that's not fair.
And that, I think, gets into the privilege, the amount of mental energy expended on having to run those arguments in your head. The fact that I don't even have to spend any ounce of energy thinking about that at all, that's a privilege that I have, for sure. And
sorry.
I think is it code switching, Micah? Correct me if I'm wrong. That idea that
Yes.
I have to act and think and talk one way in this group, and then over in this group, I can act and talk and you know, this other way is definitely, and I think we all go through that to a certain degree. You know, you start a new job, you're still feeling things out, and you're still unsure of who's around you. You're going to be much more guarded, much more professional. You know, think about when people come in for job interviews. They're projecting, they're switching the code, and they're just this very straight-laced professional person. And you know, I want to get to see the real person. And the fact that some people feel like they have to switch that code, that's, you know, the absence of that is privilege.
And if I can add to that, I think the consequences are farther reaching than just personal safety too. Because I've seen people just out and about who just don't ever seem to code switch. They've decided, I'm not going to do that. That's not me. I'm going to be who I am. I don't care what you think about me. And one of the problems there is when they're perceived in a negative light by somebody, so are a million other people. That stereotype is picked up from one person and then reinforced to a whole population. So, I mean, you know, Micah might not want to be seen as the angry black man, but he also doesn't want other people in his community to be seen as the angry black man because that's how he was today. You know, he doesn't want his attitude for one day to reflect poorly on the next black person that person in the grocery line sees. You know, that's one of the harms in that. And I mean, even more close to home is, you know, I might be worried for my personal safety, but I might be worried for my family's safety too. And I mean, something you might not know about me, I have two adopted sons who are both black, and I don't think about these things for myself. I never do. I don't have to. But I certainly do for my kids, and think about, you know, how much I let them, you know, a 7-year-old walk up and down my block. You know, I know he'll be safe. He'll be good for himself, but, you know, I only want him to get so far. I want to make sure he's close enough that I can, you know, I can be there for him, and people can associate him with me, because I have had situations where, you know, one of my kids has been out, and even though I'm about 30 feet away, they didn't see me because I was around the other side of a tree, and they stopped thinking there was a lost kid in the neighborhood right in front of my house when he lived there, and I'm, you know, within conversation's reach of him. So I think that's absolutely a choice to be made. I think that's a really heavy choice. I mean, Micah, you're the best person to speak to all that, but I think there's a lot more consequences to consider. You know, do I choose to not code switch? Do I choose to conform, or do I choose to be more authentic to myself?
Yeah, you hit it right there. And just to your point, Sarah. So it's not that I'm conforming who I am. I'm just very cautious of it, for the sake of my safety for my family's safety, and for the fact that I don't want, like you said, I don't want all black men to be looked at it that way. And I'm also just looking at it professionally, because if I, passionately discuss what I feel in a way that's offensive to someone else, or may come off as me being aggressive, my opportunity to move forward may not be there anymore. So I'm looking at it professionally as far as my future, for my kids, for me as a black man. So there's a lot of different aspects that goes into that. Not the fact that I am who I am, and I'm anybody who knows me. I'm not aggressively or angry, but sometimes it comes off that way. My demeanor, my face, my facial expression. I have the whole driving face thing going sometimes, where I'm just kind of like just focused, and it looks like a scowl, as if I am mad, but I'm very easygoing, very loving. But just to that point, it's so many different things. It's my safety. Okay, if I'm here in this place and I begin to say how I feel or begin to get aggressive, one, I'm trying to make it back home. And then two, I'm trying to set an example for my kids, so that they're not viewed that way, or all black people are not viewed that way, or all black men are not viewed that way. Then I also look at it professionally. Okay, if I express my point here, then I may not be able to move forward, or that opportunity again. It doesn't necessarily come that easy for me. I'm thinking about so many different things that I'm processing at that moment. It's just like it's tough to just keep up with. Sometimes it's exhausting. That's why I'm glad I can go home and just just exhale, because it is a mental struggle to just constantly look through that lens of race, and that's just the way that I perceive it. Now, is it always right? No, but is that the world that we live in? Absolutely. And I can't help that.
So, but if you accept that, though, if you accept it to the point at which you have to modify your behavior or, look through that lens, the assumption there is that every person that you interact with is racist. And if you accept that, how can we ever get over racism if we assume that everybody is racist? I have personally never had a situation where I thought, oh, that's an angry black man, or oh, that's an angry black woman. Like that specific circumstance, like that doesn't really make sense to me. Like, I understand that, I've heard other people say that, but it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like it's healthy for us as a society to think that it's okay for you to have to live in that way every day, and you only feel comfortable at home or around, other people of color or whatever the case may be. That just seems inherently unfair. That's not the world that I want to live in, quite personally. Like, you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that the term that I'm kind of thinking about is like emotional labor and like ownership. Like, it is not on, and this is not what I think you're saying, but just to be clear, it's not on Micah or on other people of color to have to constantly assess who around them has racist or anti-racist thoughts, because that's incredibly exhausting and can be physically dangerous. But you're right, it's a really, I'm not gonna cuss, it's a really terrible world to have to live in like that. So I think the anti-racist call to action, especially as white people, is to do that work with our families, with our friends, with ourselves, with our coworkers, with our organizations, because I don't take any bodily risk having like conversations with people, calling out when I hear people maybe say things like angry black man, angry black woman. Like, there's no risk to me in stepping into that and calling that out and arguing with that. It seems too much to ask, I think, of people that are already experiencing the brunt of systemic racism to have to do that mental gymnastics and emotional work of assessing and changing the minds of those around them.
And Sarah, I don't, like, you're one of many that, like, you should, it is unfair. I shouldn't have to live that way. And I can't let someone know, how to feel about me when I get in a certain action. But just from life experiences, Those are the things that have happened to me. So, for example, like, you know what it feels like to be walking past someone. You're minding your own business, but to see someone clutch their purse, or me walk by a car and someone locks the door, you know, and it's like little things like that. It's like, man, I don't get the benefit of the doubt. Like, one day I was walking into Kohl's one day. I was in college and I had dreads. I'm very well dressed. I have a shirt, tie. I just left my internship. I'm going to just go shop. And I walk in, the buzzer goes off. As I'm walking in the store, I haven't been in here. A person is walking out, and nothing is said to the white person that just walked out. It's just like me, like, can I help you, sir? Do you need anything? I'm like, no, I'm just walking in. It's little things that have cultivated over my life. That's like, man, I have to be mindful in everything that I do, what I say, my demeanor, because society has told us this is what a black man is. Now, everybody doesn't think that way. And I'm not putting that on every white person or everyone, but from just my life experiences and the things that we've seen in our culture, in our media, those are the things that kind of shape who we are. And the fact that, you don't have to think that way. You don't have to worry about that. That's not a lens that you have to look through, but that is the definition of privilege. The fact that you don't even have to think about that. And like I said, I am who I am as far as with anyone, but I'm just very cautious and I have to be very mindful of certain situations, and just be mindful and just think about it and go about it a different way, because I would be perceived as something different when I'm being very genuine, and I'm, doing the right thing. So I just have to be mindful of that.
And I think this would be a very different conversation if you were the only one that had to do this. That would be Micah versus the world. But what you're describing is not unique to you. That's similar thoughts and conversations and preparations and safeguards are taken in, I won't say every, but I would hazard most black families. The fact that black parents have to have the talk with their black children about how they need to act in society and the consequences of their actions. When, as a white parent, I don't even have to think about that with my kids. Like Sarah said, that's just unfair. It is. It's privilege and it's wrong.
Absolutely, man. No, just great points there, guys. And I don't know, I have a lot of stories of just little things like that, man. And that goes to that point of just with the police, just being a kid, 16 years old, being pulled over by cops with my friends, held at gunpoint, like nobody moved, everybody put their hands in their laps. You guys selling drugs, like we're searching you, can we search your car? Where are you guys coming from? And just the third degree. We're just kids just driving, following our parents on the interstate. But we get pulled over from traffic doing 90 miles an hour when everybody's flowing with traffic. We get pulled over and profiled pretty much. And criminal, it's like, why? You know what I mean? And you have to call back up to give me a ticket, and we got to sit with our hands in our laps. They check everybody's ID in the car. Like, where does that happen? When does that ever happen? And just being just really untreated, unfairly. But like I said, it's just a lot of different things, a lot of different situations in my life, where I just have to view it through that lens. And if I want to make it home, sometimes I have to, be mindful of the way I interact, because it's not always promised. And just with everything that's going on now, it seems like every week, every day, we're seeing another person of color or African-American male, black man killed by the hands of cops. So there's certain situations I have to be very mindful. I'm going to conform to, okay, yes, sir. Even if I'm angry and I'm upset, I have to be mindful like, okay, take the ticket to make it home. Or I could be passionate about my stance and possibly lose my life. That's for me. That's a no-brainer. But no, I would love to talk about this, and I don't want to hold up the time because this is very interesting. I love to have these types of conversations so that you can get to know me, so that you can get to know, the whole aspect of who I am, and just what this subject about just being just about privilege. So I love it. But we're going to transition to the next question here. So the next question is, how often have you had conversations about race at work, and why or why not?
So my first job out of college, I was a middle school teacher in Memphis, Tennessee. And I taught at a school where the student body was 98% Black. And I was 22, and I'm obviously very white. In that role, and in that I was part of a larger teacher organization, and we had a lot of conversations about race, and it was really beneficial. I felt like that's where I learned a lot and became super aware of privilege and systemic racism. However, since I left that job in 2017, I've talked about it 0 times. No, that's not true. John and Mike and I talked about it last week. We talked about it 1 time. And we talked about this a little bit, how challenging it is, because unfortunately it's become so politicized, and being a public servant and like a bureaucrat, right, and an apolitical organization, it unfortunately can be tricky to navigate. And so I'm very, very thankful for this opportunity and the work that you all have done, John and Mike, on engaging people in these conversations and bringing resources together, because I have not initiated a conversation about race. I have not been involved with one at work since 2017.
Yeah, I can echo that somewhat. It just hardly ever happens. It's seen as a hot button issue. It's something you don't really want to step into. You don't want to cause conflict among your coworkers, all that stuff. I have had some discussions. To my memory, it's all been around my sons, the adoption of my 2 sons, and some of the things I've experienced with them. So there have been a handful of times I've very carefully navigated conversations, and I think once with you, Micah, during an HR training, once. And so once in a while I bring it up, but I mean, even then I feel like I'm tiptoeing. I can't go too deep into the conversation. I have to very much gauge who I'm talking to make sure that's not going to be any sorts of conflict between us, and even think about who might be listening. When we're in the office anyway, I work over in the service center where we're a cube farm. So if I'm having a conversation, there's probably somebody else listening. And so, I have to be very much aware of what the effects of that conversation might be, and make sure I'm speaking factually and carefully, and not going too far down a path that's going to stir up conflict.
All right. Any other guys? Do you guys have anything?
I've had I guess conversational things that have come up about race, where somebody has asked like, oh, this is a coworker's asked, this is a situation that happened. Do you think that race was involved in this, or something like that? I've never had a situation where I was like in a meeting and actively witnessed racism or anything, but I do think that those conversations are kind of being had, but probably in a less formal setting at the city would be my assumption.
It's interesting. I work in HR, and thinking back, I was probably 6-7 years into my HR career before I had a conversation about race, other than employee relations investigation, stuff like that, of course, but an honest conversation with a coworker about race. And it was a good 6-7 years into my professional career that 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 happened. And you would think, you would hope that HR, that would happen a lot more frequently, but it's a taboo topic for some reason. And I think people treat it as a taboo topic so that they don't have to confront the harsh reality. If we just don't talk about it, then it doesn't exist, type of deal. Or it's easier to deny that it's a big problem if we don't discuss it.
I mean, our organization is really, 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 really white. So that's another part of privilege, right? Like, we don't have to talk about it, because if we don't, like, we're not going to feel, the majority of us are not going to feel the pain of it if we don't talk about it. So we don't have to live it. That's privilege.
Well, there's the awkwardness of it. Even if you do feel that desire to be anti-racist or become more informed, you don't just go up to somebody and say, "Hey, what?" It's really tough to be vulnerable enough to take that step out into the unknown, especially when you've never done it before. But man, it sure is enlightening to challenge those perceptions and assumptions, and not even that, just to connect with somebody and see life through their lenses. That's such a rewarding experience, to be able to understand another person like that. That's huge. But yeah, I mean, up until recently, haven't been having a lot of discussions now. It's been my passion. That's why I've been training on it for the past decade plus. And so in the training environment, yeah, I'm having those conversations a lot. But outside the training room, just with coworkers, it very rarely happens, even in HR. So.
No, that's very interesting. I think that you guys all hit it. I think it's a taboo subject. It's one of those where you want to be politically correct. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to offend your coworker. So those conversations tend not to be had at work. But as you said, John, I love to get to know someone, to see their point of view, to see, the lens that they look through, because we all look through a different lens, but to just see what someone else, the way that they view it, I love to get to know someone like that and just really just jump into that conversation.
Well, it kind of gets back to what Aaron was saying. There's that inherent fear of, well, I don't want to be called a racist, so I'd rather not say anything than risk saying the wrong thing. And so they don't have those conversations, even if the conversation or the interest is genuine. And that's what we need to overcome, is be willing to step out, be vulnerable, extend grace both ways. And that doesn't go for just race, that goes for everything. But be willing to show that humanity, accept that, be vulnerable, be forgiving, extend grace, learn from each other.
I think I have a slightly different perspective on racial discussions at work, because I think for me they're not necessarily taboo, in that, like I said, I've had them with several employees at the city, past, current, whatever. And I think it's less taboo than it is personal. I think it's a personal discussion. I think if you have rapport with somebody and you know each other at a particular level, it's comfortable to have those conversations both ways. But I think if it's somebody that you don't know very well, those are just very personal. It's a very personal topic. Those are personal questions that come up. It's a personal conversation. So I think, to me, it's almost more of like a, how well do you know your coworkers, or whatever the case may be, more so than it is taboo. Because in my experience, when you know somebody, it's not a taboo topic.
Yeah, I'll absolutely agree with that, because as you were saying that, I'm thinking back through the people I've had these conversations with, and they're all people that I've worked closely with and have built relationships with. And yeah, I'd agree with that. You have to have that trust there to have that conversation.
It's interesting. It begs the question, though, why, if race is an everyday thing that impacts everyone in some form or fashion, why do we feel like we have to trust somebody before we're willing to talk about it?
I don't think that I need to trust them so much as it is just to, well, for example, if you're in the line at the grocery store and you don't know somebody in front of you, it'd be a little weird if you're like, hey, so how do you feel about race? Can we talk about it? Because then you're
Talk about race relations.
Yeah, because then you're profiling that person based on their race, assuming that they have thoughts and feelings about it that are a particular way, and you're kind of picking at them to learn what that is. Whereas if it's a person that you know, it'll naturally come up as part of who they are as people. So
Sure.
At that point, it's them as a person. It's not them as like a person of color or whatever the case may be. So it's like, that's why I think it's more of a personal thing than it is necessarily a trust issue or a taboo thing. I think it's just if you know them well enough to the point at which the conversation comes up, it's natural. But if you force it with a stranger on the subway or a stranger in line at the grocery store, it's weird. That's like somebody being like, so, do you want to have children? And I'm like, I don't know you. Why are you at? Because I have a womb? You think I have a discussion about this? Like, why are we talking about this right now? You know what I mean? So that's more of a comfort thing than a trust thing, in my opinion. But
do you think that, like, for your, like, our white coworkers, like, as white people, it's not as person, you know what I mean? Like, I'm wondering, because I'll speak for myself. I'm not at the point right now where I'm approaching my white coworkers, which, let's face it, most of my coworkers are white, and saying like, hey, let's talk about how racism impacts the way we allocate resources in the city. Or let's talk about like how race impacts, I don't know, our team dynamics, or how, I'm not doing that. And that thought makes me kind of like, but I'm comfortable with them. We're all close. They're all white. I wouldn't feel like I was targeting or profiling and I wonder if that kind of speaks to that underlying taboo and that thought that if, God forbid, we talk about race and somebody gets called a racist, it's the worst thing in the world. It's not an opportunity for growth. It's a burning at the stake. You know, like, I just think there's, I don't know. I'm not asking a specific question. I'm kind of just thinking out loud.
Which I kind of think if an issue came up and then nobody wanted to talk about it, it would be an issue. So, you know, at that point, it's just, are we asking the right questions as an organization?
That's fair. And
somebody has to bring it up.
Yeah.
Well,
They should be white people. We have to bring it up.
Well, and kind of back to our privilege conversation, the fact that we can decide to dip our toe into that water or not and have a conversation about it, whereas for others, it is their life. It is every single day they're having to confront those situations or have those thoughts or have those discussions with others. You know, I kind of equate it, I'm naturally an introvert, and if I go and I do a training or I go to an event, I have to be on, right? I have to flip that switch and be a little bit more outgoing, but it's draining. And after the fact, I kind of flip the switch back down and I have to like decompress a bit. You know, the fact that, you know, we'd have to choose to say, okay, we're going to talk about this. I don't know, versus it's a constant thing that's omnipresent every waking moment. Is something I have to deal with or think about.
Yeah, I've got two things kind of echoing in my head, and Sarah and Aaron, you each said one of them. Aaron, the idea of consequences for talking about race, you kind of alluded to this at one point, but you know, everyone's afraid of being labeled a racist. And that's part of why I'm at the point where, like, I don't want to label somebody a racist. I want to call out the action and correct the action. I don't care if that person, you know, if they show patterns, yeah, that's a problem, but let's address the problem. Let's not, you know, cancel the person. You know, so that's one thing I think we have trouble bringing it up because we don't want to be on the bad end of that in the way of cancel culture these days. And the other one, if I can remember what it was, about talking with your friends. I think a big thing there is how much you're willing to invest in it. So maybe not necessarily the trust on how, you know, are they going to accept what I say? How are they going to react? But it's a big thing. I mean, Micah and John, y'all been putting together video series to open the conversation. I'm sure you have hours of footage from these interviews and these panels we've done, because this is a big topic to unpack. I mean, you look at the number of books that have been written about racism and racial divide in America just in the last like 2 years. It's crazy. So a lot of times it's not something you can just bring up in a conversation, have a conversation about it and move on. You know, if there's a divide, you've got to be ready to work and figure your way through that divide because it's a lot to unpack.
Let's go to lunch and solve racism.
Right.
That is definitely true. It is a long haul journey.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so funny that you mentioned that, Tyler. And me and John had this conversation when we were talking about diversity, inclusion, and we were talking about this whole journey. And you know, he kind of asked me like, "Hey, are you sure this is something that you want to do?" You know, and just having just that reassuring thing of like, "Hey, man, this is not just something that just happens quickly. This is not something that just happens in a short span of time, but this is something that happens on a long period of time. And sometimes you may not always be in favorable odds, giving your opinion and giving your point of view. But that's just one of the things that just happens with it. And I'm definitely like I tell them, I'm all in, and we're going to go on this journey together, man, and just figure it out. There are some things that I can work on, you know, personally, but there's some things that we can work on together collectively within the United States of America or within Texas or wherever you want to go with it in your community. So definitely good. I want to jump into this last question here. And the last question says, why do white people often get so defensive when it comes to talking about race?
Because I think it's a judgment against them personally. I think that's the core of it. I think when you feel that discussions of racism mean me and people that look like me are terrible people, have done bad things, we're responsible for suffering of others, I think it's real quick to internalize that. I think that's what you have to break down, honestly, is that it's not a judgment against a person. It's a problem we all need to solve. I think that's why people get so defensive.
Yeah, being called a racist is the worst thing, right? It equates you with the most violent, you know, horrific extremists in our country's, I was going to say history, but unfortunately in our country's current as well. Yeah, and it, I think we've concocted it as a static identity, like Tyler said. Like you are, you know, if you are a racist, you are a racist, and you are bad, and you are done, and it's if that's how you define it, and then of course it's terrifying if you know and uncomfortable. But if you define it as more, you're a product of a system, and you can choose with every action and every word and every thought to be racist or anti-racist. And if somebody calls out something you do as a racist, that's actually a gift because it gives you the opportunity to better inform how you treat others and how you view all of humanity as worthy and equal. That's a gift. Being called out is a gift, and it's an opportunity. And I'm not saying that'd be easy, or that's not how I 100% see it right now personally, but that to me would be the goal because it moves you forward, and it's a way of calling somebody in to work and into growth and into inclusion instead of just calling somebody out, right, and canceling them. It's giving them an opportunity. I think, Tyler, you also said a good thing, though. It's a spectrum and it's a continuum, and there are certain individuals, there are certain systems, there are certain institutions that have patterns of repeated and extremely harmful racist actions. That's not what I mean when I say call them in, like be really generous and have conversations. Like, I don't mean that. I think there are some things that we have to unequivocally say, that's wrong, it's bad, it's evil, get it out. And there are more often than not, I hope in our circles, our lives, our families, our friends, the latter, right? That there's the people that just want to learn and grow, and we have the opportunity to have those conversations with, and they don't need to be canceled. They just need to be invited in to a new way of thinking.
Yeah, and to be clear, you know, I don't think anybody's saying all white people are always defensive. Let's not stereotype that way either. Personally, I think it is, people feel like it's a values judgment, that you are judging me and my worth by challenging this. And, like, I know my parents and they were good people, and my grandparents and they were good people, and you're saying that we're all racist. That's devaluing me and my entire family. We got to get over that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not necessarily a value statement about you as a human being. Now, yeah, to your point, Aaron, if you're one of the neo-Nazis out there overtly doing, okay, yes, but the day-to-day, by and large interactions, that's what we're talking about. If we can get over the fact that this isn't a value statement against you as a human being, this is an opportunity.
All very valid points, man. That was definitely a great, allows me to see just a point of view of why, some people may be defensive when when talking about race. Are there any last thoughts or any last comments? I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I can talk about it for another hour or two, because that's just the way that I love it. But are there any last thoughts or anything?
I kind of like to chime in on that last one a little bit, because I think that if white people are uncomfortable talking about race, I think that sometimes, in addition to what everybody else said about not wanting to offend anybody or appear racist or whatever, I think that, at least me personally, I don't really feel that I have a racial identity. I don't identify heavily with my race. It's not something that I think about that much. My family is not from the United States. We moved here from Europe. So I feel a different kind of us versus them that is more relatable to me than the color of my skin. The phrase "y'all ain't from around here" is one that I've heard many, many times in my life. But it's, so for me, it's like, so not having a racial identity, to have a conversation, depending on the context or whatever, I could see that being uncomfortable, because it's like, that's an experience that it's hard to relate to, right? Like, I can't talk to a Texan about being told y'all ain't from around here 8 times a day. It's just like, they don't have that same experience. So it's like, if I don't have the experience of having a racial identity, maybe it could be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about what that feels like with another person, because it's hard to relate to, possibly.
That's a great point, Sarah.
Very great point. That's really good. Any last thoughts?
Mike, I just want to thank you for sharing some of your experiences. I am sure it's not pleasant, or I don't know. It's probably extremely exhausting to have to recount times when systemic racism is reared its ugly head. But I just I thank you for doing that. I think it really helps humanize some of these conversations, and it was really informative and powerful to me. So thank you.
Oh man, awesome, man. That's no problem at all. I think it's more so just I like to let people know my point of view and the reason why I think the way that I think. And I have a lot of different experiences going back to just race and a lot of different things, that has shaped my wits, that shaped my lens of the way that I look through certain things. But I still believe in humanity, and I still love people, and I love to hear people's point of view. I love to hear their experiences, because then we begin to dig a little deeper and get closer together, where we can okay, man, hey, I went through the same thing, and it's just not necessarily a black thing or white thing, or but it's a us thing. We all go through certain things. Like I said before, I think we have more in common than we have differences. So that's the beautiful thing about it. Absolutely. Thank you.